J.D. Vance walked onto the set of a popular primetime news show, adjusting his suit and flashing a calm, almost amused smile as he prepared for what he knew would be an adversarial interview. The host, a well-known liberal commentator notorious for her aggressive questioning style, barely let him sit down before launching into her attack. "Senator Vance," she began, her voice dripping with condescension, "many critics say you've abandoned your own principles to become nothing more than Donald Trump's errand boy. How do you respond to that?" Vance chuckled, shaking his head as if he had just been told the most ridiculous joke of the day. "Well," he said, "it's interesting that you'd phrase it that way because, from where I sit, the real errand boys in Washington are the people who parrot talking points from the media elites, rather than representing the people who elected them." The host blinked, caught slightly off guard. She wasn't used to conservative guests pushing back so quickly. But she quickly regained her composure and leaned forward, ready to press the attack. "Come on, Senator. You were a vocal Trump critic before, and now you're one of his biggest supporters. Isn't that just political opportunism?" Vance smirked. "You mean kind of like how you used to be against wars before you started cheering them on when your party was in charge? Or how you used to claim to support working-class Americans before throwing them under the bus to defend corporate interests?" He shrugged. "People evolve when they realize they were wrong. I saw firsthand how Trump's policies benefited working Americans. Manufacturing jobs came back, wages rose, and small towns started recovering. So yeah, I changed my mind. That's called learning from experience, not being an errand boy." The host's face tightened. "So you're saying you don't just do whatever Trump tells you to?" "I do what my voters elected me to do," Vance said without missing a beat. "Now, if that aligns with Trump's policies, which, by the way, did more for middle America than anything your preferred politicians have done in decades, then I'm happy to support it. What I won't do is take marching orders from a media that spends more time obsessing over Trump's tweets than covering real issues." The audience in the studio, usually stacked in favor of the host's viewpoints, let out an audible murmur. Even some of them had to admit that was a solid point. The host, sensing she was losing control of the narrative, changed tactics. "But what about January 6th? You've defended Trump even after that day. How do you justify supporting a man who—" Vance held up a hand. "Let me stop you right there. If we're going to play the guilt by association game, are you ready to hold Democrats accountable for every riot, every crime wave, and every act of political violence committed by their supporters? Or does that only apply when it's convenient?" the host stammered. "That's not what I'm saying." "No, that's exactly what you're saying," Vance interrupted, his voice steady but firm. "The truth is, you're not interested in fairness or logic. You just want to push a narrative, but the American people see through it. That's why trust in the media is at an all-time low." The audience reaction was louder this time. Some clapped, some gasped, and others just sat in stunned silence. The host looked visibly flustered. She shuffled her notes as if searching for something that could salvage the segment. "Well, Senator Vance, I think we'll have to agree to disagree." Vance grinned. "That's usually what people say when they've run out of arguments." The segment wrapped up quickly after that, and as Vance stood to leave, he could see the crew members whispering to one another, some even smirking. As he walked off set, his phone buzzed with texts from friends and allies who had watched it unfold live. The clips were already going viral. By the time he reached his car, headlines were flooding social media. J.D. Vance destroys liberal host. Vance wipes the floor with smug anchor. Epic takedown on live TV. He chuckled, shaking his head as he put his phone away. Another day, another media ambush turned back on itself. As J.D. Vance settled into the backseat of his car, his phone kept buzzing with messages and notifications. His team had already clipped the best moments from the interview and uploaded them to social media. Within minutes, his takedown of the host was spreading like wildfire. His communications director, Mark, sat beside him, grinning as he scrolled through the reaction online. "Senator, you just broke the internet. The clip already has 500,000 views in the last 15 minutes. People are loving how you turned the tables on her." Vance smirked and leaned back. "It's not hard when they're so predictable. These people don't come to debate. They come to perform for their audience. All you have to do is expose the script. As the car rolled through the streets of D.C., Mark read out some of the best responses from social media. J.D. Vance. Just torched her so badly, she might have to file an insurance claim. He chuckled and kept reading. Vance just put on a clinic in how to handle media hit jobs. Take notes, Republicans. Vance laughed. You gotta love the internet. Then Mark's face changed slightly. Of course, the usual suspects are furious. The media's already spinning it, calling it Vance's embarrassing meltdown. Vance rolled his eyes. Right, because staying calm and making rational points is now considered a meltdown. Let me guess. They'll throw in some buzzwords about disinformation and dangerous rhetoric. Already happening, Mark said. They've got the panel of experts lined up to tell everyone why you're dangerous and why facts don't actually mean what you think they mean. Vance shook his head. They never learn. Every time they pull this, more people wake up to the game. The car arrived at a private event where Vance was scheduled to speak. As he stepped out, supporters and donors shook his hand, laughing and congratulating him on the interview. A few young conservatives approached him beaming. "Senator, that was incredible," one of them said. "We've been waiting for someone to finally call them out to their faces like that." Vance smiled and patted the young man on the shoulder. "Glad you enjoyed it. But remember, this isn't about me. It's about pushing back against the nonsense and fighting for the people who actually make this country work." The event was electric, with Vance's speech doubling down on everything he had said in the interview. The crowd ate it up. The more the media tried to paint him as a villain, the more everyday Americans rallied behind him. As the night wound down and he finally had a moment to himself, he scrolled through his phone. The clip had hit over 5 million views and was trending #1 on multiple platforms. Even some moderate commentators were admitting that Vance had dismantled the host's arguments with ease. He put his phone down and smirked to himself. Today had been a good day. The media thought they could corner him, but instead they had handed him one of his biggest wins yet. The next morning, J.D. Vance woke up to a fresh wave of headlines, social media reactions, and furious op-eds from left-leaning outlets. As expected, major news networks were in full damage control mode, attempting to reframe the interview as a supposed right-wing meltdown, while conveniently ignoring how their host had been the one caught flat-footed. Mark called him bright and early. "Morning, Senator. You're officially public enemy #1. Again." Vance chuckled as he sipped his coffee. "Let me guess. They're calling me unhinged and dangerous?" "Bingo," Mark said. "One columnist even compared you to a MAGA attack dog who's eroding democracy with his words." Vance smirked. "Right, because calmly pointing out hypocrisy is now a threat to democracy." Classic. He flipped through the TV channels, landing on a morning news show where a panel of analysts sat around dissecting his interview. One of them, an aging political strategist, shook his head dramatically. Vance's behavior last night was emblematic of the radical shift in the Republican Party. No interest in facts, just performance and aggression. Vance couldn't help but laugh. "No interest in facts?" he muttered to himself. "That's rich coming from these people." Mark sighed on the other end of the phone. "We knew this would happen. They can't engage with what you actually said, so they'll just try to frame you as some kind of extremist." Vance nodded. And meanwhile, normal people watching that interview saw exactly what happened. Every time they pull this nonsense, they lose a little more credibility. By the afternoon, his team had fully leaned into the momentum. The interview clip was everywhere. Memes flooded the internet with side-by-side comparisons of the host's stunned expression and Vance's cool, collected responses. One particularly viral post had the caption, "When you prepare to humiliate your guest, but he comes prepared to humiliate you instead." Calls started pouring in from conservative media outlets, all wanting him to appear on their shows to discuss the interview. Even some more neutral journalists were reaching out, sensing that this was a major political moment. But what really made Vance smile was seeing everyday Americans reacting. Truck drivers, small business owners, blue-collar workers, people who weren't obsessed with politics but knew when someone was speaking common sense, were all commenting and sharing their thoughts. One Twitter user put it perfectly. "Vance just showed the entire country how to handle these smug media types." Don't take their bait. Don't let them frame the debate and hit them with facts they can't refute. Masterclass. That evening, as Vance prepared for another speaking event, he received a text from an old friend back in Ohio. It was short and to the point. Man, that was legendary. Keep making them squirm. He smiled, slipped his phone into his pocket, and walked onto the stage to another round of applause. The media had thought they could take him down, but all they'd done was prove his point. And he had a feeling they'd be making the same mistake again very soon. The energy in the room was electric as J.D. Vance stepped onto the stage. The crowd, a mix of working-class voters, young conservatives, and even a few disillusioned moderates, erupted into cheers. The interview had turned into a political moment, bigger than anyone had expected. And the people gathered here weren't just fans, they were fired up. Vance adjusted the mic and leaned forward, smirking. Well, folks, looks like I caused a bit of a meltdown last night. The audience roared. With laughter and applause, he shook his head. You know, I walked into that studio expecting a debate, maybe even a fair discussion. But what did I get? The same tired script, the same smug accusations. Errand boy for Trump, they said. And yet, somehow, I was the only one in the room thinking for myself. A chant broke out in the crowd. USA, USA, USA. Vance let it roll for a few seconds before raising a hand to settle them down. They want you to believe that if you don't fall in line, if you don't repeat their talking points like a good little puppet, then you must be an extremist, he continued. But you know what's really extreme? Sending billions of dollars overseas while our own cities crumble. Ignoring working-class Americans while bending over backward for corporate lobbyists. That's extreme. Standing up for everyday people? That's just common sense. More applause. A woman in the front row shouted, "Tell him, J.D." He grinned. Now the media spent all day trying to spin that interview. They brought in their so-called experts to tell you why I was wrong, why I was dangerous. They did their little panel discussions and wrote their angry op-eds. But let me ask you, did any of them actually refute what I said? A loud no echoed through the crowd. Exactly. Because they can't, Vance said. All they can do is attack, smear, and hope you're too distracted to notice that. They never actually answer the questions that matter. The energy in the room surged. People weren't just nodding along, they were engaged, fired up, ready to fight back. And let me tell you something, Vance continued, his voice steady but powerful. They think they can cancel people like me. They think they can intimidate us, silence us, make us afraid to speak up. But I've got news for them, we're just getting started. The crowd erupted again, clapping, cheering, whistling. Vance took a step back and let the noise fill the room. He could feel it. This wasn't just about him. This was about something bigger. The media, the political establishment, the so-called elites, they were losing their grip. People weren't buying their nonsense anymore. They were waking up. As the cheers died down, he leaned in again. So here's my message to the media. Here's my message to the career politicians who think they can dictate how we live our lives. We're done playing by your rules. We're done letting you set the terms of debate. And we're done sitting down and shutting up while you run this country into the ground. Thunderous applause. The people were on their feet. Vance nodded, letting the moment sink in. They call us deplorables. They call us backward. They call us dangerous. But you know what I call us? Americans. The roar that followed was deafening. As he stepped off stage, his phone buzzed again. Another message. This time, from a major conservative leader. That was a home run. Let's talk soon. J.D. Vance smiled to himself. The media had tried to humiliate him, but instead, they had only made him stronger. They had given him a platform, and he had turned it into a movement, and he had a feeling they'd be making the same mistake again very soon. As J.D. Vance left the stage, shaking hands and exchanging quick words with supporters, his team gathered around him, all grinning like they had just won a championship game. Mark, his communications director, was the first to speak. Senator, I don't know if you realize this, but that wasn't just a good speech. That was a defining moment. Vance smirked. You think so? Oh, I know so, Mark replied. That wasn't just a rally. It was a movement coming to life in real time. The media tried to put you in a corner, and instead, you just gave one of the most powerful speeches of your career. The people are with you. Just then, a staffer handed Mark a phone. "We're at 6 million views on just the interview clip," she said. "And the speech? Already trending on Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. Even some people who don't usually like us are admitting you crushed it." Vance took the phone and scrolled for a moment, his eyebrows raising. Even some moderate voices were acknowledging that the media had overplayed its hand. A few independent journalists were openly calling out the hypocrisy of the interview. Even some of the usual late-night comedians had refrained from mocking him, likely because they realized it would only make him more popular. Then his phone buzzed with another text, this time from an unknown number. He opened it. "We need to talk. Big opportunity. Call me." Vance showed Mark the message. "Recognize this number?" Mark frowned, then quickly pulled up a contact list. After a moment, his eyes widened. "That's a pretty major donor." He let out a low whistle. "Looks like your little media takedown just put you on the radar of some serious players." Vance exhaled and pocketed his phone. "Well, isn't that interesting?" Just as they were about to head out, another staffer rushed over. "Senator, we've got CNN, MSNBC, and even a New York Times reporter all requesting a follow-up interview." Mark scoffed. "Oh, now they want to talk," Vance chuckled. "Of course they do. They saw the reaction and now they're desperate to correct the narrative." He paused, thinking for a moment. "Tell them I'll consider it, but under my terms." Mark grinned. "You want to do a rematch with the same host?" Vance smirked. "Let her sweat a little first. I want them to know that next time they're the ones walking into my interview." The team burst into laughter as they made their way out of the venue, the night air crisp with the feeling of something big on the horizon. J.D. Vance had gone into that TV studio expecting a fight. But instead of being put on the defensive, he had turned the entire game upside down. The media had tried to humiliate him, but all they had done was fuel his rise. And now, the movement was just getting started.